Between 1800 and 1850, roughly 20,000 mountain men ventured into the uncharted American wilderness, facing brutal winters, starvation, and deadly encounters with nothing but an axe, a rifle, and raw determination. These men conquered the harshest landscapes on the continent using skills that modern society has almost completely forgotten. With their bare hands and simple tools, they transformed forests into shelters that stood for generations. Here's what it was really like to build a cabin from scratch in the untamed wilderness. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. So, we're going back to the 1830s frontier tonight. But hold on, get comfortable first. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. Your eyes flutter open to darkness, not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom with streetlights leaking through the blinds. This is complete, absolute darkness, the kind that swallows you whole. It's a frigid October morning in 1834, somewhere in what will someday be Montana. Right now, it's just wilderness, a vast expanse of mountains and forest where the only law is survival. The ground beneath you is hard-packed dirt, frozen from the overnight chill. Your entire body aches from sleeping on it. Instead of your cozy mattress, you're lying on a bed of pine boughs that barely cushions you from the cold earth. Your wool blanket is stiff with frost and your breath forms clouds in the pre-dawn air. The fire you built last night is nothing but embers now. Your hands sting with fresh blisters as you push yourself up. The storm that's been brewing for days is closing in. Dark clouds loom over the distant peaks and the wind carries the sharp scent of snow. You've been in these mountains long enough to read the signs. This isn't just any storm, it's the kind that kills unprepared men. You have two choices. Build shelter today or freeze to death within a week. Most folks don't realise I learned this from an old journal I found in a historical society archive, that a mountain man had maybe 12 hours to get a basic cabin up once he decided winter was coming. 12 hours between life and death. The journal belonged to a trapper named Jeremiah Winters who worked these mountains in the 1830s. He described how he once built a cabin with nothing but an axe sharp enough to cut bone, hands tough as leather, and the knowledge that failure meant death. His account is fascinating because it shows just how much skill these men had. This wasn't just throwing some logs together. You stretch your back, feeling yesterday's labour in every muscle. You've spent 3 days scouting for the perfect location, and yesterday you finally found it. A small clearing on a gentle south-facing slope near a spring that won't freeze even in the deepest winter. There's a natural windbreak of dense pines to the north, and from this elevation you can see anyone approaching from miles away. These weren't random choices. Every decision matters when your life depends on it. Let me paint you a picture of what you're facing. Towering pines surrounding you, their trunks 3 feet thick, reaching 100 feet into the sky. The forest floor is a tangle of fallen logs, rocks, and undergrowth. To your untrained eye, it's just wilderness, but to a mountain man, it's all material. Everything you need to survive is right here, if you know how to use it. You grab your possibles bag, a leather pouch containing your essential survival items, flint and steel, knife, whetstone, awl, a few strips of jerky, and a small pouch of salt. Your rifle leans against a tree nearby, and your axe, a handcrafted tool with a head forged in St. Louis, is buried in a stump where you left it yesterday. I've actually held one of these period axes at a museum in Wyoming. The curator told me these weren't just tools, they were literally worth a man's life out here. A mountain man would sleep with his axe rather than risk it being stolen. The first light of dawn barely penetrates the forest canopy as you stir the embers of last night's fire and add some tinder, shredded cedar bark you've kept dry in your bag. You blow gently, coaxing the sparks to life. The tiny flame catches, and soon you've got enough fire to warm your hands and cook a meager breakfast of jerky and the last of your cornmeal mixed with water. You know what's crazy? For these guys, this wasn't camping. This was Tuesday. They lived like this for years at a time, completely alone in the wilderness. Can you imagine going months without seeing another human being? I mean, I get anxious when my Wi-Fi goes out for an hour. With breakfast done, you grab your axe and head to the edge of your clearing. Today's the day. You've already marked several straight lodgepole pines, perfect for cabin logs. Their straight grain and resistance to rot makes them ideal building material. First rule of cabin building, an old mountain man once told a journalist in 1872. Pick your trees like you'd pick a wife, straight, strong, and able to weather the storms. You approach the first tree, about 14 inches in diameter and nearly 100 feet tall. Taking a deep breath, you swing your axe, feeling the satisfying bite as the sharp edge sinks into the bark. Chips of wood fly as you make a notch on the side facing the direction you want the tree to fall. Your arms already burn from the effort, but you keep going. There's no rest when winter's coming. Each swing of the axe is deliberate, calculated. You're not just chopping, you're having a conversation with the tree, reading its lean, its balance, understanding how it will fall. Wait, hold up. Picture this. You're alone in this massive wilderness. If this tree falls wrong, if it snaps back or doesn't fall where you intend, there's no one to pull it off you, no ambulance to call, no hospital within 1,000 miles. One mistake and you're just another nameless casualty of the frontier. I spoke with a wilderness survival expert who specializes in historical techniques, and he told me something fascinating. These men developed a sixth sense about trees. They could read the subtle signs of how a tree would fall, the way the branches distributed weight, how the grain twisted, even how the wind affected it. It wasn't just strength. It was an intimate knowledge of the materials they worked with. The notch deepens nearly a third of the way through the trunk. Now you move to the opposite side, making a slightly higher cut. This technique, learned from native tribes and perfected by generations of woodsmen, ensures the tree falls exactly where you want it. With a series of final, powerful swings, you hear it, that unmistakable crack that signals the tree is beginning to give way. You step back quickly, eyes fixed on the top of the pine as it sways, hesitates, and then surrenders to gravity. The crash echoes through the forest as 100 feet of pine thunders to the ground, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. The impact shakes the earth beneath your feet, and the scent of fresh-cut pine fills the air. One down. You'll need at least 20 more before the day is done. Your body is screaming for rest, but the clouds on the horizon are darkening. You can practically smell the snow in the air, maybe 12 hours before the storm hits, if you're lucky. Oh, and here's a detail most history books leave out. Mountain men didn't just need shelter for themselves. Your horse is tethered nearby, grazing nervously as the wind picks up. Lose your horse to the cold and you might as well dig your own grave. No horse meant no mobility, no way to transport traps or furs, and in many cases, no way to outrun hostile natives or predators. A wise trapper, one 1840s account stated, builds his horse shelter before his own. A dead trapper still has his horse. A live trapper without a horse soon becomes dead. Now you need to limb the fallen tree, cutting away all the branches to leave a clean trunk. Your axe bites into the smaller limbs, while larger branches require careful cutting to avoid binding the axe. Each stroke must be precise. Wasted energy means death when you're burning thousands of calories a day just to survive. The sun climbs higher, but the warmth is fleeting. The wind is picking up, carrying the first few snowflakes. You work faster, stripping the tree down to a bare log, then moving to the next marked pine. By midday, your hands are raw. Blood seeps through the fresh blisters, making the axe handle slick and even more painful to grip. But you don't stop. Can't stop. 3 trees are down now, their massive trunks lying parallel in the clearing. In my research, I found an account from a mountain man named James Clyman who wrote, "My hands bled so bad from the axe that my log notches filled with blood. By nightfall, I couldn't feel my fingers, but I kept swinging. The alternative was a shallow grave come spring thaw." Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since dawn. You pause only long enough to chew on a strip of jerky and drink from the nearby spring. The water is so cold it makes your teeth ache, but it refreshes you enough to continue. The next tree is thicker, nearly 2 feet in diameter. You circle it looking for the best approach, then begin chopping. Your muscles have found their rhythm now, and despite the pain, each swing falls with practiced precision. But halfway through, disaster strikes. The axe head, loosened from thousands of impacts, suddenly flies off the handle, landing several feet away in the underbrush. "Well, shit," you mutter, staring at the useless wooden handle in your hand. This is one of those moments where modern folks have no concept of what real trouble is. Today, you drive to Home Depot. Out here, this could literally mean death. Your heart races as you search the undergrowth. Losing your axe now would be catastrophic. You drop to your knees, frantically pushing aside leaves and twigs until, there, the metal head gleams dully in the filtered sunlight. Relief floods through you, but it's short-lived. Now, you need to reattach it, and quickly. From your possibles bag, you pull out a small roll of rawhide that you've been saving. You soak it in water from your canteen to make it pliable, then set to work. First, you carefully reshape the top of the handle where it fits into the axe head. Then you wedge it back together, wrapping the wet rawhide tightly around the join. As the rawhide dries, it will shrink, creating a bond nearly as strong as iron. While you wait for it to set, you use your knife to continue limbing the fallen trees. It's slower, more tedious work, but you can't afford to waste a moment. I interviewed a historical reenactor who specializes in mountain man skills, and he told me, these men weren't just survivors, they were problem solvers of the highest order. They had to be engineers, architects, doctors, hunters, weathermen and warriors, all rolled into one. And they had to do it all with maybe 10 tools total. After an hour, the rawhide has dried enough that you can cautiously resume your work. The axe head is secure for now, but you'll need to check it frequently. Each swing is tentative at first, but soon you're back to your previous pace. The day wears on. 4 trees down, 5, 6. Your shadow stretches long across the clearing as the sun begins its descent behind the mountains. The temperature is dropping rapidly, and the snowflakes are getting larger, more frequent. Your body is at its limit. Every muscle screams for rest. Blood has soaked through your buckskin gloves, and your vision blurs with exhaustion. But the primitive shelter of pine boughs that protected you last night won't keep you alive through what's coming. You look up at the darkening sky. "Just give me till morning," you whisper, though you're not sure who you're talking to. Maybe God. Maybe just the mountains themselves. With 7 tall pines felled and limbed, you've got enough to start the actual cabin construction. Tomorrow you'll cut more, but today's work has earned you a fighting chance. As darkness falls, you build up your fire and force yourself to eat more jerky, even though exhaustion has killed your appetite. You know you'll need every calorie for tomorrow's labor. The wind moans through the trees and snow begins to fall in earnest. You wrap yourself in your blanket beside the fire, your axe within arm's reach. Sleep comes instantly, your body surrendering to exhaustion. But even in sleep, your mind is working, planning tomorrow's labor, calculating what you'll need, how you'll notch the logs, raise the walls, build the roof. Because out here, even your dreams must be practical if you want to survive. Unlike your cozy bed right now with its soft mattress and warm covers, your sleep is light, alert, ready to wake at any sound that doesn't belong. The mountain lion's scream, the wolf's howl, or worse, the soft footfall of an approaching grizzly drawn by the scent of man. This is where we'll pause for tonight. Tomorrow we'll see if our mountain man can raise those walls before the full force of the storm hits. But for now, let the gentle weight of your blankets remind you how far we've come from those desperate days when shelter meant the difference between life and death. Just imagine, as you drift towards sleep, what it would feel like to know that your survival depends entirely on what you can build with your own two hands before the storm arrives. Something's wrong. Your eyes snap open to complete darkness. For a moment, you can't remember where you are, then it all comes rushing back. The clearing, the felled trees, the approaching storm. The fire has died. That's what woke you. The bitter cold has crept in, seeping through your wool blanket, settling into your bones. You sit up, every muscle screaming in protest. Your hands are so stiff you can barely move them, the blisters now frozen scabs that crack and bleed as you flex your fingers. Snow blankets the ground around you, not the gentle dusting from yesterday evening, but a solid 3 inches. It fell silently while you slept, a white shroud covering everything. Your breath hangs in the air, a cloud of crystallized vapor that disperses slowly in the still morning. You check the eastern sky. No hint of dawn yet, but you can't afford to wait for the sun. Every hour of daylight is precious now. I read an account from a trapper named William Anderson who described waking up in similar conditions. My beard had frozen to my blanket. When I tore free, it pulled out a patch of whiskers. My spit turned to ice before it hit the ground. But I knew that if I didn't move, I'd be stiff as a board by sunup. With aching fingers, you rake through the ashes of last night's fire, praying for a live coal. There, a faint orange glow buried deep in the white ash. You gently place your handful of tinder, cedar bark you've kept dry inside your shirt, over the ember and blow softly, rhythmically, coaxing it to life. The spark catches, a tendril of smoke rising from the tinder. You add pencil-thin twigs, then slightly larger ones, building the fire methodically. Fire isn't just comfort out here, it's life itself. As the flames grow, you stand and stamp your feet, trying to force blood back into your numb toes. Every joint in your body feels like it's filled with ground glass, but you're alive, and as long as you're alive, you can build. While the fire strengthens, you check your supplies. The jerky is nearly gone, maybe 2 days' worth if you ration it carefully. Your powder is dry, thank God, safely wrapped in oiled cloth. The axe head is still firmly attached to its handle. Small victories. You actually slept in your boots to keep them from freezing solid. Smart move, because wet leather freezes harder than stone, and you can't work with feet like blocks of ice. You wolf down a strip of jerky and drink from your canteen. The water inside is half-frozen slush. The forest is preternaturally quiet, muffled by the snow. You can almost hear your own heart beating. This is the silence that makes men start talking to themselves after too many months alone. "Okay," you mutter, your voice sounding strange after days of silence. "Gotta get moving." You know, mountain men had a saying, dawn to dusk, swing that axe, or come spring, a bear's shitting on your grave. Not exactly poetry, but it got the point across. The snow has complicated things. You'll need to clear it from the fallen logs before you can work them, and more trees to fell means tramping through snow to find the right ones. But first things first, you need to start processing the logs you already have. Yesterday was about quantity, getting enough trees down to work with. Today is about precision, turning those logs into the components of a cabin that will keep you alive. With your knife, you scrape a patch of snow clear and use a charred stick to sketch a rough plan in the dirt. The cabin will be small, roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, just enough space for a sleeping platform, a fireplace, and room to move around. Anything larger would be impossible to heat efficiently. As the first grey light of dawn filters through the pines, you gather your tools and approach the first log. Ideally, you'd let these logs season for months, but winter won't wait. You'll have to work with green wood and deal with the shrinkage later. First step: remove the bark. Bark holds moisture and attracts insects. It has to go. You take your axe and begin stripping the log, working from one end to the other. The bark comes away in satisfying chunks, revealing the pale, fresh wood beneath. I once tried this at a living history museum in Colorado. The historian there said, "Most folks don't realize that debarking a single log can take hours. These mountain men would spend days just prepping logs before they could even start building." The work is tedious but rhythmic. As you settle into the familiar swing, scrape, move pattern, your muscles warm up and the pain recedes to a dull background throb. The sun finally crests the eastern mountains, sending long golden rays through the trees. The snow glitters like scattered diamonds, and for a moment the beauty of it takes your breath away. Then a gust of wind cuts through your buckskins, reminding you that beauty out here is just death wearing a pretty mask. By mid-morning, you've debarked 3 logs. Your stomach is growling, but you ignore it. No time for a proper meal now. You chew another strip of jerky as you work, the tough meat softening slowly in your mouth. Now comes the challenging part: notching. The corners of your cabin will be held together by precisely cut notches that lock the logs together. Get this wrong, and your walls will be unstable, full of gaps that let in wind and snow. You've seen enough cabins to know the basic technique, the saddle notch. It's the simplest and most effective for a one-man job. You'll cut a rounded groove near the end of each log, sized to cradle the log that will rest on it. Measuring is crucial. You pace off the dimensions again, marking the corners with stakes. Then you drag the first debarked log to position it as the base of the north wall. Marking the notch points takes careful calculation. You hold your axe handle horizontally across the log, using it as a straight edge to mark where the cuts need to be. 2 notches, one at each end, to receive the east and west wall logs. With your axe, you make a series of parallel cuts at the marked point, about 4 inches apart and 6 inches deep. Then you chop out the wood between the cuts, forming a rough trough. This first notch isn't pretty, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to hold the next log securely. The sun climbs higher, melting some of the snow. Your back is slick with sweat despite the cold, and you pause occasionally to drink from the spring. The work is slow, exacting. Each notch requires at least 20 minutes of careful chopping. Hold up a sec. Let me paint you a picture of what's happening here. You're standing in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The mountains rise like blue giants in the distance. The fresh snow covers everything except the circle around your fire and the areas where you've been working. Your breath clouds in front of you. Your hands are raw, leaving smears of blood on the pale wood. Every few minutes you stop to wipe sweat from your eyes with a sleeve already stiff with frozen perspiration. A hawk circles overhead, riding the thermal currents, probably wondering what this strange 2-legged creature is doing. The only sounds are your axe biting into wood, your laboured breathing, and occasionally the distant howl of a wolf. This is what solitude really means. Not an hour without your phone. I'm talking complete isolation from humanity. It's just you, the mountains, and the knowledge that if you fail, no one will ever find your body. By noon, you've positioned and notched the 4 base logs, the foundation of your cabin. It's starting to take shape, a simple rectangle marked out on the snowy ground. But you're only just beginning. You need more trees. The 7 you felled yesterday aren't nearly enough. Looking at your progress, you estimate you'll need at least 15 more for the walls, plus more for the roof. You trudge through the snow, axe over your shoulder, searching for the right trees. Not just any tree will do. You need straight ones with minimal taper, ideally about a foot in diameter. Pines preferably for their straight grain and natural resistance to rot. I spoke with a forestry expert who studied the cabins built by mountain men, and he told me these guys were incredibly selective. They could look at a stand of 100 trees and immediately identify the 5 worth cutting. They weren't just lumberjacks, they were craftsmen who understood their materials intimately. You spot a perfect candidate, a lodgepole pine about 14 inches at the base, arrow straight with few branches on the lower trunk. You check the surrounding area to make sure it has a clear fall path, then begin chopping. Your technique has improved since yesterday. You create the notch on the fall side more quickly, angling your cuts to create a precise wedge. Then you move to the back side, making a slightly higher horizontal cut. The tree begins to creak. You step back, watching the top for any sign of movement. There's a moment of complete stillness, then a sharp crack. The pine begins its descent, picking up speed, the branches rushing through the air with a sound like tearing fabric. It falls exactly where you intended, crashing through the smaller trees in its path, finally coming to rest with a ground-shaking thud that sends a puff of snow into the air. 1 down, many more to go. The day settles into a rhythm. Fell, limb, debark, repeat. Your body moves on autopilot while your mind drifts. You think about the warm trading posts down on the Missouri with their roaring fires and barrels of whiskey. You think about St. Louis with its bustle and noise and women in calico dresses. Seems like a dream now. I found this letter from a mountain man to his sister back east. Sometimes I wonder if the towns still exist, or if they've all vanished like morning mist. The wilderness has a way of making civilization seem like a story someone told you once. By mid-afternoon, you've added 3 more trees to your stockpile. Your hands have gone beyond pain to a sort of numb detachment. Blood has soaked through your gloves, making the axe handle sticky. You've stopped noticing the cold, except when the wind gusts. The sky is darkening again, not just with the approach of evening, but with more weather. The storm is building, layers of heavy clouds rolling in from the northwest. You might have 1 more day before it hits full force. You turn your attention back to the cabin site. With the base logs in place, you need to start building upward. This is where it gets tricky. Raising the logs alone is back-breaking work. For the next level, you cut a sloping ramp of smaller logs, creating a rough incline up to the top of the base logs. Then you laboriously roll the next log up this ramp, using your shoulder as the main power source. The first one nearly defeats you. Halfway up the ramp, the log shifts unexpectedly, almost rolling back over you. You leap aside just in time, watching as it crashes back to the ground, destroying part of your ramp. Son of a bitch, you snarl, kicking at the snow in frustration. I read an account from a trapper who described this exact problem. Raising logs alone is a dance with death. 1 slip and 2,000 pounds of pine will snap your spine like a twig. I saw a man near Fort Hall crushed flat when his log rolled. We buried what was left of him in a shallow grave and divided his possessions. That's frontier justice. You rebuild the ramp, making it less steep, and try again. This time, you use a rope looped around the log to help control it as you roll it upward. Your progress is agonizingly slow, but the log finally reaches the top of the ramp and settles into the notches cut in the base logs. Success. One wall is now 2 logs high. The rest of the afternoon passes in a blur of sweat and strain. You manage to raise 1 more log on each wall before darkness begins to fall. The temperature drops with the sun, and the wind picks up, driving icy needles of snow against your face. Your fingers are numb claws, your lips cracked and bleeding from the cold and dehydration. When you finally stop, your legs nearly buckle beneath you. The cabin is taking shape, a rectangle of logs 2 high, the beginnings of what will be your sanctuary against the coming winter, but it's nowhere near complete. At your current pace, you estimate 3 more days of work before it's even marginally habitable. The question is whether the storm will give you that long. You gather firewood, armloads of branches from the trees you felled, and build up your fire to a roaring blaze. Tonight will be colder than last night, and you need all the warmth you can get. Sitting by the fire, you pull off your gloves to examine your hands. They're a mess, blisters upon blisters, some broken and seeping, others swollen with fluid. Your palms are crisscrossed with cuts from bark and splinters. You pour a little precious water over them to clean away the blood and dirt, then hold them close to the flames, welcoming the stinging pain that means feeling is returning. Your muscles are trembling with exhaustion and hunger gnaws at your belly. You force yourself to eat sparingly, just enough jerky to keep your strength up. When that runs out, you'll need to hunt, but that's a problem for another day. As darkness settles fully over the forest, you wrap yourself in your blanket and lie down beside the fire. The day's work has left you too exhausted to worry about comfort. Sleep takes you almost instantly, dragging you down into blackness. But even in sleep, your mind is working, solving problems, planning the next day's labor, how to raise the walls higher, how to create the gable ends, how to fashion a roof that won't collapse under the weight of snow. Because out here, even your dreams have to be practical. The mountains don't care about your hopes or fears. They only respect preparation and grit. And as you sink deeper into sleep, the snow begins to fall again, silent and steady, covering your fallen logs, your tools, the entire clearing in a fresh blanket of white. Unlike your warm bed now, with its soft pillows and controlled temperature, your sleep is restless, half alert. One ear always listening for the approach of danger, one hand never far from your rifle. But for now, you've survived another day. In the wilderness, that's victory enough. The wall of logs is beginning to rise, a testament to human determination against the indifferent force of nature. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, the most difficult part of the build, but for now, rest. Gather your strength. The cabin that stands between you and death is taking shape. Log by grueling log, a sound wakes you. Not the wind, not an animal, something else. You lie perfectly still, eyes closed, listening. There it is again, the distinct crunch of snow under a moccasin. Someone's approaching your camp. Your hand slides to your rifle, fingers wrapping around the cold metal of the barrel. Out here, visitors are rarely friendly. It could be Blackfoot warriors who've killed more than a few trappers in these mountains. Could be claim jumpers looking to steal what little you have. Could even be a rogue grizzly, though they should be denning up by now. The footsteps pause. Then a voice calls out, rough but distinctly human. Hello, the camp, coming in friendly. You sit up slowly, rifle ready but not aimed. Show yourself. 2 figures emerge from the tree line, their breath clouding in the cold morning air. Men in buckskins, each with a rifle and an axe, trappers by the look of them. One's tall and lanky with a greying beard that reaches his chest. The other's shorter, stockier, with a face so weathered it looks carved from the mountains themselves. Name's Fitzgerald, says the tall one. This here's Cooper. Spotted your smoke yesterday evening. Thought we'd check if you was alive or dead. I've read Dozens of trapper journals, and this was more common than you'd think. In the vast wilderness, trappers would sometimes seek each other out, especially before winter. Safety in numbers, sharing of skills, and honestly, probably just to hear another human voice after months of isolation. You lower your rifle slightly, but keep it close. Trust comes hard in the mountains. What brings you boys this far up? Cooper spits a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. Beaver, creek down yonder's lousy with 'em, but that storm coming ain't no joke. Saw you was building, figured maybe we could lend a hand, make it go faster. You study them carefully. Their gear is worn but well maintained. No signs of desperation that might make them dangerous. And truth be told, you could use the help. Coffee's ready if you want some, you say, nodding toward your small fire. It's as close to a welcome as you're going to give. You know what's funny? I found this letter in a historical archive where a mountain man wrote to his brother, met two fellows building a cabin near the Yellowstone. We helped raise their walls in exchange for coffee and conversation. Neither of us mentioned how we nearly shot each other at first light. Some things don't need saying out here. Fitzgerald and Cooper hunker down by your fire, accepting the tin cups of black coffee you offer. The liquid is bitter and strong, boiled multiple times from the same grounds, but hot. Out here, that's luxury enough. As dawn breaks fully, you study your new companions. Both men have the hard, lean look of those who've survived multiple winters in the high country. Their buckskins are patched and stained, their faces wind-burned and etched with lines, but their eyes are clear and alert, the eyes of men who've learned to see danger before it sees them. That's a good start you got there, Fitzgerald says, nodding toward your half-built cabin. But them walls need to be higher before that storm hits proper. Cooper grunts in agreement. Reckon we can get it done today if we all pitch in. You're not a man who trusts easily, but survival trumps suspicion. And 3 men can accomplish in a day what would take you 3 on your own. Got tools for all of us, you ask? Cooper pats the axe hanging from his belt. Never go anywhere without old Betsy here. Fitzgerald stretches his lanky frame and stands. Let's get to it then. Daylight's burning. I interviewed an expert on frontier cooperation at the Wyoming Historical Society, and she told me these temporary partnerships were crucial for survival. Men who might normally compete for trapping territory would come together to build cabins, hunt, or fight off threats. Then they'd go their separate ways, sometimes without even learning each other's real names. With the addition of Fitzgerald and Cooper, the work takes on a new rhythm. Fitzgerald, it turns out, has built more than a few cabins in his day. He shows you a better technique for notching, what he calls the saddle notch. See, you don't want to cut straight across, he explains, demonstrating with his axe. You want to round it, like this, so the log above sits snug, keeps the wind out better. His technique creates a curved depression at the end of each log, perfectly shaped to cradle the crossing log. It's simple but effective, the kind of knowledge that can only come from experience. Cooper, meanwhile, is a master at raising logs. With his stocky, powerful build, he devises a lever system, using smaller logs as fulcrums to lift the heavy pine trunks into place. Learned this from the Frenchies down on the Mississippi, he says, grunting as he throws his weight onto the lever, raising a log that would have taken you hours to position. Work smarter, not harder. The morning passes in a blur of coordinated effort. Logs that would have taken you a full day to raise are now going up every hour. The walls climb steadily, 3 logs high, then 4. You planning a fireplace? Fitzgerald asks during a brief water break. East wall, you reply, pointing. Figured I'd use those rocks from the creek bed. He nods approvingly. Smart. We should leave the opening now. Save you having to cut it later. You'd been so focused on just getting walls up that you hadn't thought that far ahead. But he's right. It's much easier to build around the fireplace opening than to cut through completed walls. You want to hear something wild? During an archaeological dig at an 1830s trapper cabin in Wyoming, they found that the fireplace foundation included buffalo bones and elk antlers mixed with the stones. The trapper had used whatever materials were available. Talk about frontier ingenuity. By midday, you've established a smooth workflow. Cooper fells and limbs, you debark and rough notch, and Fitzgerald does the final notching and directing the placement. The cabin walls now stand 5 logs high, taller than a man. The sky has darkened further, and the wind carries the unmistakable smell of snow. Fat flakes begin to fall, slowly at first, then more steadily. "She's coming on faster than I figured," Cooper says, glancing at the sky with a frown. Fitzgerald nods grimly. "We've got maybe 5 hours of daylight left. Need to get them walls up to full height and start on the roof, or all this works for nothing." The mention of a roof presents a new challenge. You've been so focused on the walls that you haven't fully planned the roof structure. Building a proper pitched roof requires rafters, beams, and more complex notching than the walls. "Ever built a roof before?" Fitzgerald asks, seemingly reading your thoughts. You shake your head. "First cabin." He spits into the snow. "Well, you picked a hell of a time to learn, but we'll get you squared away." As the afternoon wears on, the snowfall intensifies. You work through it, ignoring the wet and cold. Your hands, already raw from days of labor, begin to bleed again, but you barely notice. There's only the work, the next log, the next notch, the next wall section. Cooper pauses to chew another plug of tobacco, studying the walls critically. "Gonna need a ridge beam, something solid, and rafters coming down from it." Fitzgerald points to a tall, straight pine at the edge of the clearing. "That one there would make a good ridge. Needs to be longer than the cabin." The 3 of you tackle the designated tree, a massive pine nearly 2 feet thick at the base. With Cooper and Fitzgerald working in tandem on opposite sides, the tree falls in minutes rather than the hour it would have taken you alone. "Now for the tricky part," Fitzgerald says, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "We need to get this big bastard up on top of them walls." I spent a week with a historical reconstruction team in Montana, and they showed me how mountain men solved this problem. The expert told me, without cranes or pulleys, they used pure physics and muscle. They'd create what we call a dead man, basically a log buried perpendicular to the cabin that they could use as an anchor point for ropes and levers. It was incredibly dangerous work. Cooper surveys the site, then points to a spot about 20 feet from the cabin. "We dig a hole there, bury a log halfway as an anchor, use ropes to guide the ridge beam up while we push from below." It's an ingenious solution, though labor-intensive. The 3 of you spend the next hour digging through the frozen ground to create the anchor point, then setting up the lifting system. "Ground's harder than a whore's heart," Cooper grunts as his axe bounces off the frozen earth. "Your experience with whores' hearts is extensive, I take it?" Fitzgerald replies dryly. Cooper shoots him a glare, then laughs, a rough, rusty sound, like he doesn't use it often. "More'n yours, you skinny bastard." This banter, rough as it is, reminds you of something you've been missing out here alone: human connection. Even this crude joking feels like a balm for the soul after weeks of silence. With the anchor set, you begin the dangerous process of raising the ridge beam. Cooper and Fitzgerald have fashioned a crude rope from rawhide strips, looping it around the heavy log. You position yourself at the bottom end, ready to push upward while they control the descent from the anchor point. "On 3, Fitzgerald calls. 1, 2, 3. You heave with all your might, muscles screaming as the massive log begins to move. Inch by excruciating inch, the ridge beam rises. Your vision narrows to just this task, this moment. Nothing exists but the burn in your shoulders and back, the rough bark under your palms. The desperate need to keep the log moving upward. Steady. Cooper shouts as the beam wavers slightly. Don't let it roll. A log this size, if it rolled now, would crush anyone in its path. The thought sends a fresh surge of strength through your tired body. Finally, after what seems like hours, the ridge beam reaches the top of the walls. With careful coordination, the three of you maneuver it into position along the central axis of the cabin. "Hold it there," Fitzgerald calls, scrambling up the walls with surprising agility for a man his age. He quickly lashes the beam into place with more rawhide strips, securing it temporarily until it can be properly notched and set. The sky is growing darker, both from the approaching evening and the intensifying storm. The snow is falling steadily now, accumulating on your shoulders and head as you work. "Need to get them rafters up before full dark," Cooper says, already moving to cut the smaller logs that will form the roof's framework. "You've never worked so hard or so fast in your life." With Fitzgerald directing, you and Cooper cut and position rafters, logs about 6 inches in diameter that extend from the ridge beam down to the top of the walls at an angle, forming the pitched roof structure. Each rafter must be notched at both ends, at the ridge beam and at the wall top, to keep it from sliding. It's precise work made more difficult by the fading light and worsening weather. I asked a historian once about how these men worked in such conditions. He told me they didn't have the luxury of waiting for good weather. If a storm was coming and you didn't have shelter, you worked through snow, sleet, whatever came. Men who couldn't or wouldn't do that simply didn't survive to tell their tales. As darkness begins to fall in earnest, you have the basic roof structure in place, the ridge beam and rafters forming a sturdy A-frame. It's not complete. You still need cross pieces and some kind of covering, but it's enough that you can finish it tomorrow, even in heavy snow. "That'll hold for tonight," Fitzgerald says, surveying your work with obvious satisfaction. "Still needs a proper covering, but it'll keep the worst of the snow off." Cooper has already started a fire inside the cabin's dirt floor. Without a proper chimney yet, smoke fills the upper portion of the space, but it's better than being fully exposed to the elements. "Might get a bit smoky," he admits, "but better than freezing solid." The three of you huddle inside the half-finished structure, passing a flask of whiskey that Cooper produces from inside his buckskins. The amber liquid burns going down, but spreads a welcome warmth through your exhausted body. "Not bad for a day's work," Fitzgerald says, looking up at the roof framework silhouetted against the darkening sky. Snow drifts down between the rafters, melting in the heat from the fire. "Would have taken me days on my own," you admit, taking another small sip of whiskey before passing the flask back. Cooper shrugs. "Man alone out here is just waiting to die. Ain't natural." There's truth in his words. Humans are social creatures. Even the most independent mountain men. Complete isolation for too long can wear down even the strongest spirit. I read this fascinating letter from a trapper to his wife back east. "Today, 3 strangers help me build my winter cabin. Tomorrow they'll be gone, and I may never see them again. But for one day, I remembered what it was to be part of mankind, not just a solitary animal in these mountains." As night fully descends, the storm intensifies. Wind howls through the incomplete roof, but the walls block the worst of it. The fire casts dancing shadows on the log walls, and for the first time in weeks, you feel something close to safe. "You got a name?" Fitzgerald asks finally, breaking a long silence. You tell them. "Well," he says, "you picked a hell of a spot for your first cabin. Good water, good timber, decent protection from the north wind. You might just make it through winter." Coming from a veteran mountain man, it's high praise. Cooper has pulled out some dried venison, tougher and darker than your jerky. He cuts 3 roughly equal pieces with his knife and passes them around. It's like chewing leather, but it's food you didn't have to provide yourself, which makes it taste better somehow. "Storm'll blow itself out in a day or two," he says between bites. "We'll get that roof properly covered tomorrow, maybe start on your fireplace if there's time." Or, "Why are you helping me?" The question comes out before you can stop it. Fitzgerald and Cooper exchange a glance. It's Cooper who answers. "Same reason anyone does anything out here. Self-interest." He takes another bite of venison. "Next time might be us needs help. Way it works." Fitzgerald nods. Mountain law. Today, you. Tomorrow, me. It's as simple and as complicated as that. Out here, where death is always just one mistake away, cooperation isn't charity, it's insurance. The fire crackles, sending sparks up toward the open rafters. Outside, the world has disappeared into a swirling white void of snow and darkness. But inside these four walls you built with your own hands, there's warmth, food, and for tonight at least, companionship. You realize your hands have stopped bleeding. The constant work has finally calloused them enough that the splits and blisters are starting to heal. Another small victory. As exhaustion pulls you towards sleep, you look around at what you've accomplished. Just days ago, these logs were living trees. Now they're the beginning of a home, a fortress against the brutal winter ahead. Fitzgerald and Cooper are already snoring, rolled in their blankets on opposite sides of the fire. Tomorrow will bring more back-breaking labour, but tonight, for the first time, you sleep inside walls of your own making. Unlike your cozy modern bedroom where temperature is controlled with the touch of a button, here the fire must be fed throughout the night. The smoke makes your eyes water and your chest tight. The ground is still hard beneath you, but the walls break the wind and the rafters catch most of the snow. It's not comfort by any modern standard, but in the wilderness, it's the difference between life and death. And as sleep finally takes you, one thought circles in your mind. I might just survive this winter after all. That night, as the storm rages outside and the fire burns low, you dream not of civilization and its comforts, but of your cabin completed, with a proper roof, a stone fireplace, maybe even a rough-hewn table and chair. The dream isn't of escaping the wilderness, but of mastering it one log at a time. Something cold and wet hits your face. You jerk awake, disoriented. Another drop lands on your forehead, melted snow dripping through the incomplete roof. The fire has burned down to embers, casting the cabin in a dim red glow. Outside, the wind howls like a living thing, angry at being kept out. Cooper and Fitzgerald are already up, huddled near the fire's remains. Cooper pokes at the coals with a stick, coaxing them back to life, while Fitzgerald feeds in small pieces of kindling. "Morning," Fitzgerald says, noticing you're awake. "Hope you wasn't planning on sleeping in." Cooper grunts. "Storm's getting worse. We got work to do." You sit up, every muscle screaming in protest. Despite the shelter, you're cold and damp. The incomplete roof let in enough snow during the night that everything has a thin coating of white. "Going to need that roof done today," you say, stating the obvious. Fitzgerald nods. "And that fireplace. Can't keep having fires on the dirt floor. Smoke's got nowhere to go." The cabin is indeed hazy with smoke, stinging your eyes and making your throat raw. A proper chimney would draw it up and out, but that means stonework. Another skill you've never had to master before. I studied an 1830s trapper's journal at the Montana Historical Society. The guy wrote, "Built my fireplace twice. First one smoked so bad I nearly suffocated, tore it down and started over, making the chimney taller and the throat narrower. Second one worked like a charm. Learned that lesson the hard way, like everything else out here." You chew the last of your jerky for breakfast, washing it down with melted snow heated over the rekindled fire. Cooper produces more dried venison from his pack, sharing it without comment. The meat is tough but nourishing. Fitzgerald, meanwhile, has a small pouch of parched corn that he mixes with hot water to make a sort of porridge. He offers you a spoonful, which you gratefully accept. After we get the roof on, Cooper says between bites, I'll try to get us some fresh meat. Saw deer sign by the creek. Good, Fitzgerald replies. Man can't work on jerky alone, not in this cold. With food in your belly and the fire providing some warmth, you all prepare for the day's work. The storm has indeed intensified overnight. When you push open the makeshift door, just a piece of canvas stretched over the opening, you're met with a wall of white. The snow is falling so heavily that you can barely see the trees at the edge of the clearing. Jesus, you mutter, pulling your head back inside. Cooper peers past you. Seen worse, but not much. Your roof first, Fitzgerald says decisively. Then the fireplace. If we're lucky, we'll have both done by nightfall. You spent an entire winter alone in these mountains, with nothing but a history book and a journal. I read an account from a mountain man named Osborne Russell, who wrote, "The hardest part of winter isn't the cold or the hunger. It's the silence. You start talking to yourself just to hear a human voice. By February, you're having full conversations with your rifle. Stepping outside is like entering another world. The snow is knee-deep in places, drifted by the wind. The cold cuts through your buckskins like a knife. But there's work to be done, and no one to do it but the three of you. First order of business, covering the roof. The rafters are in place, but they need crosspieces and some kind of waterproof layer. Purlins, Fitzgerald says, gesturing to the smaller logs you'll need to cut for the crosspieces. We'll lay them across the rafters, then cover the whole thing with bark or boughs. Cooper is already moving toward a stand of younger trees at the edge of the clearing. These saplings will do. Straight, flexible. With axes in hand, you and Cooper begin felling the smaller trees, none more than 6 inches in diameter. They come down easily, requiring just a few strokes each. Fitzgerald, meanwhile, begins stripping large sheets of bark from some of the logs you felled previously, but haven't used yet. Pine bark makes a decent roof in a pinch, he explains, working his axe carefully under the thick outer layer of a fallen trunk. Peel it off in big sheets, overlap 'em like shingles. Won't last forever, but it'll keep the snow out till spring. I spoke with a wilderness survival expert who specializes in historical techniques, and he explained bark roofing was common among mountain men. They typically use whatever was available, pine, spruce, or cedar. The trick was peeling it in the largest possible sheets and overlapping them from the bottom up, just like modern shingles. In dry conditions, these roofs could last several seasons. Working in the deepening snow is exhausting. Your boots are soaked through, your fingers numb despite your gloves, but the three of you establish a rhythm. Cooper cuts, you haul, Fitzgerald positions. By midday, you've laid all the purlins, the smaller logs running horizontally across the rafters, creating a framework for the bark covering. The next step is lifting the sheets of bark up onto the roof. This is tricky as the bark is surprisingly heavy, especially when wet with snow. It also breaks easily if bent too far. Careful with that, Fitzgerald cautions as you struggle to hoist a large section. We ain't got time to peel more. Cooper fashions a crude ladder from smaller logs lashed together with rawhide strips. With this, Fitzgerald can climb onto the roof while you and Cooper pass up the bark sheets. The process is slow and precarious. Fitzgerald balances on the rafters and purlins, his footing uncertain on the snow-slick wood. One wrong step would send him crashing to the cabin floor 8 feet below. "Pass that big piece," he calls down, gesturing to a sheet of bark nearly 6 feet long. You and Cooper lift it together, struggling against its awkward weight and the gusting wind that seems determined to tear it from your grasp. Fitzgerald leans down from the roof edge, his fingers grasping for the bark. For a heart-stopping moment, he slips, one foot sliding off the purlin. He throws his weight backward, barely catching himself. "Son of a bitch," he gasps, regaining his balance. Cooper shakes his head. "Told you you're too old for roof work." "And I told you to kiss my arse," Fitzgerald retorts, but there's no real heat in his words. These men have clearly worked together before. I discovered a memoir from a trapper named William Hamilton who described a close call during cabin building. "Slipped from the roof beam, caught myself by one arm, dangled there 20 feet up, certain I was bound for glory. Jenkins grabbed my wrist and hauled me back up like I was no heavier than a rabbit. Never said a word about it after, just expected the same from me when his time came." By early afternoon, half the roof is covered. The overlapping bark sheets aren't pretty, but they're functional. Where the bark doesn't quite meet, Fitzgerald stuffs the gaps with moss and pine needles, natural insulation that will help keep heat in and snow out. While Fitzgerald continues working on the roof, you and Cooper turn your attention to the fireplace. This is perhaps the most crucial element of the cabin. Without proper heat, winter in these mountains is a death sentence. The east wall has been left with an opening about 4 feet wide, framed by shorter logs specifically cut for this purpose. This will be the fireplace and chimney. "Need rocks," Cooper says, heading toward the creek that runs about 50 yards from the cabin site. "Big ones for the base, smaller for the chimney." You follow him, both of you trudging through the snow. The creek is partially frozen, its edges crusted with ice, but the centre still flows, dark and swift. Along its banks, smooth river rocks of various sizes are half buried in snow. Cooper points to the largest. "We'll start with them, build up from there." The rocks are heavy, some weighing well over 100 pounds. You dig them from the snow with your hands, then roll them up the slight incline toward the cabin. It's back-breaking work, made worse by the cold and the awkward footing in the deep snow. By the time you've gathered enough rocks for the base, your hands are raw and bleeding again despite your gloves. But there's no time to rest. Cooper is already arranging the largest stones in a semicircle against the east wall opening. "We'll need mud for mortar," he says, looking around. "Ground's frozen, though. Could melt snow and mix it with dirt from the cabin floor," you suggest. He nods approvingly. "That'll work. Got any clay nearby? Clay would make better mortar than simple mud, but you haven't seen any in your exploration of the area." "Don't think so." "Dirt'll have to do then," Cooper says pragmatically. "Might need to add some pine needles for binding. My pa used to do that back in Kentucky." You know what's wild? I came across this letter from a settler describing a trapper's fireplace. The strange man had mixed deer blood with his mud mortar, said it made it set harder. Whether true or superstition I cannot say, but that fireplace stood strong while the rest of the cabin eventually rotted away. While Cooper continues arranging the base stones, you gather dirt from the cabin floor, scraping away the top layer to reach the unfrozen soil beneath. You fill a pot with snow and set it by the small fire still burning inside, letting it melt into water. Outside, the storm shows no signs of abating. The wind drives the snow horizontally at times, and the temperature continues to drop. Your breath freezes in your beard, forming ice crystals that clink together when you move your head. Fitzgerald has nearly finished the roof, working methodically from one end to the other, overlapping each bark sheet with the next. Despite the conditions, his work is precise, born of years of experience. Almost done up here, he calls down. How's that fireplace coming? Getting there, Cooper replies, not looking up from his stonework. You mix the melted snow with the dirt, creating a thick, sticky mud. Following Cooper's suggestion, you add a handful of pine needles, stirring them in with a stick. The resulting mixture isn't pretty, but it holds together when you squeeze it. That'll do, Cooper says, when you bring it to him. He scoops a handful and begins packing it between the stones, creating a crude but effective mortar. The base of the fireplace takes shape, a semicircular arrangement of large, flat stones extending about 2 feet into the cabin. On this foundation, Cooper begins building upward, using progressively smaller stones. Need a good deep firebox, he explains. Heat bounces off the back wall, radiates into the cabin, too shallow, and all your heat goes up the chimney. I interviewed a historical reconstruction specialist who told me the angle of the firebox was crucial. Mountain men learned, often through trial and error, that the back wall should angle forward slightly as it rises. This reflects more heat into the room. It's a principle we still use in modern fireplace design. As the afternoon wears on, your work falls into a steady rhythm. Cooper builds the fireplace stone by stone. You mix more mud mortar and fetch more rocks from the creek. Fitzgerald completes the roof covering and begins working on a proper door, a simple but solid affair made from split logs lashed together with rawhide. The physical labour warms you despite the cold, but whenever you pause, the chill seeps back into your bones immediately. Your feet are blocks of ice inside your wet boots, and your fingers are so numb you can barely feel the stones you're handling. How long you been out here? Cooper asks suddenly, breaking a long silence. 3 months, you reply. Came up from Fort Union in August. He nods. First winter? In these mountains, yeah. Cooper and Fitzgerald exchange a glance that speaks volumes. First winters are when most men die. You're doing all right, Fitzgerald says, in what seems to be high praise coming from him. Picked a good spot, building solid. The approval from these veteran mountain men means more than you'd like to admit. I found this journal entry from a first-year trapper. Alderman Birch inspected my cabin today, thought they'd laugh at my crude work, but Oldham just nodded and said, "You'll live." From him, that was like a governor's commendation. By late afternoon, the fireplace has reached the height of the walls. Now comes the tricky part, the chimney. It needs to extend above the roofline and draw properly, or the cabin will fill with smoke. Cooper fashions a crude scaffolding outside the east wall, allowing him to continue building upward. The chimney narrows as it rises, forcing the smoke to accelerate and draw better. Make it too wide, smoke won't rise proper, he explains. Too narrow, it'll clog with creosote and catch fire. Inside, you line the firebox with the flattest stones you could find, creating a relatively smooth interior that will reflect heat efficiently. The back wall angles forward slightly, following Cooper's instructions. As daylight begins to fade, far too early this time of year, Fitzgerald completes the door and hangs it on leather hinges. It's rough work, but it swings freely and, most importantly, will keep out the wind and cold. Need a latch, he mutters, looking around for suitable material. Will this work, you ask, offering a piece of antler you've been carrying, a lucky find from earlier in the fall. Fitzgerald examines it, then nods. Perfect. With his knife, he carves a simple but effective latch mechanism. The antler piece pivots on a wooden peg, dropping into a notch to secure the door closed. Outside, Cooper has finished the chimney. It rises about 3 feet above the roofline, crowned with a crude cap of flat stones to keep out the worst of the snow, while still allowing smoke to escape. Moment of truth, he says, climbing down from his scaffolding. Inside, you lay a fire in the new fireplace, small at first, to let the mud mortar dry gradually. All three of you watch anxiously as the flames catch. For a moment, smoke billows into the cabin and your heart sinks. But then, as the fire grows stronger, the smoke begins to draw upward, pulled by the draft of the properly constructed chimney. "There she goes," Fitzgerald says with satisfaction as the smoke disappears up the chimney, leaving the cabin air relatively clear for the first time. It's a triumph, small in the grand scheme of things perhaps, but monumental in your current circumstances. You have walls to break the wind, a roof to keep out snow, and now a fireplace that provides both heat and cooking capability. Cooper grins, the first genuine smile you've seen from him. "Reckon we earned our supper." While the new fireplace heats the cabin, Cooper heads out to check the snares he set earlier near the creek. He returns within the hour, snow-covered but triumphant, carrying a pair of snowshoe hares. "Fresh meat," he announces, holding up his prize. The prospect of something other than jerky and dried venison is almost dizzying. Your mouth waters as Cooper expertly skins and cleans the hares, then spits them on green sticks to roast over the fire. The aroma that fills the cabin is intoxicating, rich, wild, and profoundly satisfying. The three of you sit around the fireplace, watching the meat brown slowly, fat dripping and sizzling on the hot stones below. When the hares are done, Cooper divides them with his knife. A leg and portion of back meat for each of you. There are no plates, so you eat with your fingers, the hot, flavorful meat burning your tongue in your eagerness. It's the best meal you've had in months. I read a letter from a mountain man to his sister back east. "You would laugh to see us eat, Eliza. No china, no silver, not even a table. Just three rough men squatting by the fire, grease running down our beards, gnawing meat from the bone like wolves. And yet, I tell you true, no fancy dinner in St. Louis ever tasted so fine as fresh rabbit in a cabin you built with your own hands." Outside, the storm has reached its peak. The wind screams around the cabin corners, searching for weaknesses, finding few. Some snow still sifts through the bark roof in places, but it's minimal, nothing like the open exposure of previous nights. The fireplace radiates a steady, penetrating heat that drives the chill from the small space. For the first time since you entered these mountains, you feel something approaching security. Fitzgerald pulls out his tobacco pouch, offering it around. You and Cooper each take a small pinch, savouring the luxury. The three of you sit in companionable silence, smoking and watching the fire. "You boys heading back to your own camp tomorrow?" you ask finally. Cooper glances at Fitzgerald, who shrugs. "Storm might keep up another day. No point fighting through it if we don't have to. Could help you finish up in here. Floor, sleeping platform, maybe some shelves, basics." The offer is generous, especially from men who have their own preparations to make for winter, but that's the way of things out here. Today, you, tomorrow, me. "Appreciate it," you say simply. As night deepens and the fire burns low, you make your sleeping arrangements. The dirt floor is still hard, but it's dry now and warm from the fireplace. You spread your blankets near the fire, feeling genuinely comfortable for the first time in days. Cooper and Fitzgerald do the same, positioning themselves so all three of you form a rough semicircle around the hearth. Outside, the wilderness may howl and rage, but in here, in this space created by human hands from the raw materials of the forest, there is shelter, there is safety. As you drift towards sleep, you look up at the roof, a latticework of rafters, purlins and bark visible in the firelight. Water no longer drips on your face. The wind no longer cuts through your blankets. The smoke rises properly up the chimney instead of filling the room. These simple comforts, taken for granted in civilization, feel like miracles here in the wild. Your last thought before sleep takes you is that you've crossed some invisible threshold. You're no longer just surviving in the wilderness, you're beginning to live in it. Unlike your modern home, with its insulated walls and central heating, this cabin is still crude and primitive, but it's shelter of your own making, crafted with your own hands from the forest around you, and that makes all the difference. Tomorrow will bring more work, endless work, the reality of mountain life, but tonight you rest in the knowledge that the worst of the storm can no longer reach you. You're building more than a cabin here. You're building a life. You wake to unfamiliar silence. The howling wind that's been your constant companion for days has finally stopped. The storm has passed. Light filters through the small gaps in the bark roof, casting dappled patterns on the dirt floor. The fire has burned low during the night, but the cabin has retained its warmth remarkably well. Cooper and Fitzgerald are still sleeping, their snores creating a strange duet in the morning quiet. You rise silently, adding a few sticks to the fire. The flames catch quickly, sending new warmth through the small space. Outside, through the single small window opening covered with an oiled piece of rawhide, you can see a world transformed. Everything is white, pristine. Snow blankets the clearing in drifts that reach halfway up the cabin walls in places. "Storm's done," Fitzgerald says behind you, his voice rough with sleep. He sits up, stretching his lanky frame. "Gonna be cold as a witch's tit today, though," Cooper grunts, rolling over. "What's for breakfast? I'm hungry enough to eat my moccasins." Despite the crude conditions, there's something deeply satisfying about this moment. The cabin, your cabin, has withstood its first storm. The roof held, the chimney drew properly, the walls kept out the worst of the wind. It's far from finished, but it protected you through the night. I found this amazing diary entry from a trapper named Hugh Glass, who wrote, "First morning in my own cabin after the storm broke. Never thought 4 walls and a roof could feel like a palace. Damn near cried into my coffee like some soft town boy. Breakfast is the last of the rabbit from last night, reheated over the fresh fire. The meat is even better after sitting overnight. The flavors more concentrated. You eat silently, savoring each bite, knowing that food will be a constant concern in the months ahead." He's right. A proper floor is more than comfort. It's another layer of protection against the cold and wet that kill more mountain men than bullets or bears ever did. "Got enough straight logs for floor joists?" Fitzgerald asks, glancing around at your remaining timber. "Should have," you reply. "Cut more than I needed for the walls." "Good," he nods. "We'll get on that after we dig ourselves out a bit." The first order of business is clearing a path from the door. The snow has drifted against it, piling nearly 4 feet high. Cooper uses a flat piece of bark as a makeshift shovel, cutting through the drift to create a narrow passage. The cold hits you like a physical blow when you step outside. The storm may have passed, but it's left behind temperatures that would freeze spit before it hit the ground. The sky above is a hard, brittle blue without a cloud in sight. Your breath creates a fog around your face that quickly turns to ice crystals in your beard. Despite the brutal cold, the scene has an undeniable beauty. The forest surrounding your clearing is transformed into a crystalline wonderland, every branch coated in white, the snow sparkling like scattered diamonds in the morning sun. "Gotta admit," Cooper says, pausing in his shoveling to survey the landscape, "don't get views like this back in St. Louis. Pretty don't keep you warm, though," Fitzgerald replies practically. "Let's get that floor in." You honestly wouldn't believe how tricky proper floor construction was for these guys. When I visited the Mountain Man Museum in Wyoming, the curator showed me a reconstructed cabin floor and explained they didn't have the luxury of milled lumber. Every board had to be split by hand using an axe and wedges, a process called riving. It was incredibly labor-intensive and the results were far from perfect. Back inside, you begin by measuring and marking where the floor joists will go. These are the support beams that will hold up the floor itself, running perpendicular to the long axis of the cabin. They need to be spaced evenly, about 2 feet apart, and somehow attached to the bottom logs of the walls. Best way is to notch the sill logs, Fitzgerald explains, pointing to the lowest logs of the cabin walls. Cut depressions for the joists to sit in, keeps everything level. With Fitzgerald directing, you and Cooper take turns wielding the axe, carefully cutting notches into the sill logs. It's precise work, requiring concentration and a steady hand. Each notch needs to be the same depth, or the floor will end up uneven. Once the notches are cut, you drag in the logs you've selected for joists, straight pines about 6 inches in diameter. These need to be flattened on top to provide a level surface for the floor planks. This is done with the axe, carefully hewing away the curved upper surface of each log to create a flat plane. Like this, Cooper demonstrates, making smooth, controlled swings with the axe. The blade bites into the wood at a shallow angle, peeling away thin strips rather than chopping deeply. You're not trying to fell it, just shave it flat. It's a skill that takes practice. Your first attempts are ragged and uneven, but you improve with each stroke. By midday, you've flattened the top surfaces of 5 joists and fitted them into their notches along one half of the cabin. Coming along, Fitzgerald approves, inspecting your work. Now for the hard part. The hard part, it turns out, is creating the actual floorboards. Without a proper sawmill, you have to split them from logs, a process that produces rough, uneven planks at best. Cooper selects a straight-grained pine about 15 inches in diameter. This'll do. We'll split it into quarters first, then eighths, then sixteenths. Each split gives us another board. Using axes and wooden wedges, you begin the laborious process of splitting the log. Cooper drives the first wedge into the end grain with the back of his axe, then adds a second when the split starts to widen. Slowly, methodically, you work more wedges down the length of the log until, with a final groan of tearing wood fibres, it splits neatly in half. Got a good grain on this one, Cooper says with satisfaction. Makes the job easier. I read an account from a pioneer woman who watched her husband and brothers build their cabin. She wrote, the men spent an entire day splitting just one log for floorboards. By nightfall, their hands were bleeding and they had only 8 rough planks to show for their labour. Yet they counted it a good day's work. The process continues. Each half is split again and then again until you have rough planks about 2 inches thick. These are still wildly uneven, the split sides jagged with splinters and torn fibres. Need to smooth these a bit, Fitzgerald says, running his hand over the rough surface of a plank. Won't be pretty, but should at least be flat enough to walk on without catching splinters big as your finger. This is done with the axe again, used almost like a plane to shave down the high spots and rough edges. It's slow, painstaking work, but gradually the planks begin to take on a more uniform appearance. By late afternoon, you've created enough floorboards to cover about half the cabin floor. These are laid across the joists, their edges butting against each other as closely as possible. They're not nailed down. Nails are far too precious to use on a floor, but their weight keeps them relatively stable. Good, Cooper says, stomping on the new floor to test it. Solid. The difference is immediate and striking. The rough planks may not be pretty, but they lift you off the cold, damp earth. The feeling of a solid floor beneath your feet after weeks of sleeping on dirt is surprisingly emotional. I found a letter in the Montana Historical Society archives where a trapper wrote to his brother, "Finally got my floor laid down. You'd laugh to see it, crooked as a dog's hind leg and full of splinters, but I damn near wept when I could stand on wood instead of dirt for the first time in months. It's the little things out here that keep a man sane." "Better put in that sleeping platform before we lose the light," Fitzgerald says, looking at the sun already dipping toward the western mountains. Days are short this time of year, and darkness comes early. The sleeping platform is essentially a raised bed built into one corner of the cabin. It serves two purposes: getting you off the floor for sleeping and creating storage space underneath. You select the north corner, away from both the door and the fireplace. Using the same techniques as the floor, you create a simple frame attached to the walls, supported by two posts on the open side. Across this frame, you lay more split planks, creating a platform about 2 feet off the floor and large enough for one person to sleep comfortably. "Might want to stuff that with pine boughs," Cooper suggests. "Makes for a softer bed." "And warmer," Fitzgerald adds. "Airspace underneath keeps the cold from seeping up through you." With the floor half completed and the sleeping platform in place, the cabin is beginning to feel like a home rather than just a shelter. The transformation is remarkable, considering it was nothing but standing trees just days ago. As darkness falls, Cooper heads out again to check his snares. He returns empty-handed this time, but unbothered. "Can't expect rabbit every day," he says with a shrug. "We'll try again tomorrow. Dinner is back to jerky and the last of Fitzgerald's parched corn. You eat by firelight, the flames casting long shadows on the newly constructed floor and walls. You did good finding this spot," Fitzgerald says, breaking a long silence. "Good water, good timber, south-facing slope. Picked like a man who knew what he was looking for." It's the closest thing to a compliment you've received from him, and it warms you nearly as much as the fire. "Got lucky," you admit. "Spent 3 days looking, almost gave up." Cooper snorts. "Luck's just preparation meeting opportunity. You knew what to look for, you found it." There's truth in his words. You may be new to cabin building, but you've learned enough about survival in your months in the mountains to recognize a good wintering spot when you see one. "How long you two been out here?" you ask, curiosity finally getting the better of you. Fitzgerald and Cooper exchange a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. "I came up the Missouri in 28, Fitzgerald answers. "Signed on with the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. Been trapping these mountains ever since." 6 years, you say, impressed. "Many men don't last one season." He nods. "Cooper's been out longer. Tell him, Coop." Cooper stares into the fire, his weathered face even more lined in the flickering light. Since 22, was with Ashley's first expedition, seen the elephant, as they say. 12 years in the mountains, it's almost unimaginable. The average lifespan of a mountain man is shockingly short, maybe 5 years, if they're lucky. Between hostile tribes, grizzlies, accidents, and the simple, brutal realities of wilderness life, few make it more than a decade. I discovered a census of trappers from the American Fur Company in 1830 that showed the average age of death for mountain men was just 35. The researcher I spoke with at the Denver Museum told me these were incredibly tough men, but the mountains were tougher. For someone to survive more than 10 years in that environment wasn't just impressive, it was almost miraculous. "You boys got plans for the spring?" you ask. Fitzgerald shrugs. "Usual. Follow the beaver sign. Try not to get scalped or eaten. Maybe head down to Rendezvous if the pelts are good. Heard they're holding it at Green River again," Cooper adds. "The annual Rendezvous is the closest thing to civilization most trappers see from one year to the next. A raucous gathering where furs are traded, supplies purchased, and a year's worth of isolation is balanced with a few weeks of gambling, drinking, and storytelling." "You should come along," Fitzgerald says. If you make it through winter, that is. It's both an invitation and a reminder of the challenges still ahead. Winter in these mountains is a merciless test, and your cabin, for all its improvements, is still just a rough shelter against forces that have killed better prepared men. Planning on it, you reply simply. The evening deepens into night. Outside, the temperature plummets further, but inside, the fireplace radiates steady heat. The new floor and sleeping platform have already made a noticeable difference in comfort. Tomorrow we'll finish that floor, Cooper says, spreading his blanket. Maybe put in some shelves if there's time. You're going to need places to store things. I've got some ideas about that, you say, thinking of the wall space above the sleeping platform, and I want to build a small table, maybe a stool. Fitzgerald nods approvingly, thinking like a man who plans to stay alive. Good. You know what got me about these guys? In a letter I found at the Historical Society in Bozeman, a trapper wrote, "Built my first chair yesterday. Crude thing, looks like it was made by a blind man with palsy, but sitting on it tonight, eating my supper like a civilized human instead of squatting like an animal, I felt like a king. These small comforts mean everything when you've gone without." As you settle in for the night, you can't help but reflect on how much has changed in just a few days, from exposed and vulnerable to sheltered and relatively secure, from struggling alone to working alongside experienced companions. The cabin is still primitive by any civilized standard, but out here, it's a fortress against the wilderness. Sleep comes easily tonight, your body exhausted from the day's labor, but your mind at ease. The sound of the fire and the steady breathing of your companions creates a cocoon of comfort in the darkness. You dream of the cabin completed, floor fully laid, walls chinked with moss and clay, shelves filled with supplies, maybe even a small window cut into the south wall to let in more light. In the dream, snow piles high outside, but you're warm and secure within. Unlike your comfortable modern bed with its plush mattress and layers of blankets, your sleeping platform is still hard and unyielding, but it's dry, it's off the ground, and it's yours, built with your own hands from the forest around you, and that makes all the difference. As consciousness fades, one thought circles in your mind. I am becoming part of this place, and it is becoming part of me. The cabin isn't just shelter, it's the beginning of a new life, rooted in the wilderness that once seemed so hostile. Tomorrow will bring more work, more challenges, but tonight you rest in the growing knowledge that you might actually survive. And in these mountains, survival is no small victory. The night deepens, the fire burns low, and the cabin holds the three of you in its rough embrace, a tiny island of humanity in a vast sea of wilderness. Outside, the stars wheel overhead, brilliantly clear in the frigid air. Wolves call from a distant ridge, their howls echoing across the snow-covered valley. But inside there are walls of your own making, a roof overhead, a floor beneath, and the promise of tomorrow. Morning arrives with painful brightness, sunlight reflecting off the fresh snow and filtering through the cracks in the cabin walls. 3 days have passed since the storm broke. 3 days of constant work, finishing the floor, building crude furniture, sealing gaps, preparing for the long winter ahead. And now it's time for Cooper and Fitzgerald to leave. Can't put it off any longer, Cooper says, kneeling by the fire to heat a cup of water. Our own cabin needs tending before the next storm hits. You nod, understanding, but not entirely happy about it. These men were strangers just days ago, yet sharing the labor of building has forged a connection that feels surprisingly deep. Appreciate the help, you say simply, the mountain man's way of expressing gratitude without getting sentimental. Fitzgerald waves it off. You'd have done the same. The truth is, you would have. That's the unwritten code out here. Today, you, tomorrow, me. No man survives these mountains entirely alone. I discovered a letter from a mountain man named Jim Bridger where he wrote, "Helped raise Thornton's cabin walls last week. He'll likely be my competition for beaver come spring, but that's a problem for later. Winter demands we stand together, even if briefly. Come thaw, we'll go back to guarding our trap lines like misers." The cabin has transformed remarkably in just a few days. The floor is complete now, rough split planks covering the entire dirt surface. A small table stands against the west wall, cobbled together from smaller logs and topped with a flattened section of pine. Beside it sits a 3-legged stool, crude but functional, better than squatting on the floor. Shelves line the wall above your sleeping platform, providing places to store food and supplies safe from mice and other vermin. The fireplace has been refined, the chimney drawer improved by adjusting some of the upper stones. Perhaps most importantly, every crack between the logs has been carefully chinked with a mixture of mud, moss, and pine needles. The sealed walls keep out the biting wind far better than before. "Turned out all right," Cooper says, looking around with quiet approval. "Better than my first cabin, that's for damn sure." "Oh?" You raise an eyebrow, curious. He chuckles, a rare sound. "Roof collapsed first, heavy snow. Nearly buried me alive. Had to dig my way out and start over with 2 feet of snow already on the ground." "How'd you manage?" you ask. Cooper shrugs. "Same way anyone manages out here. 1 day at a time, 1 log at a time." There's wisdom in his simple philosophy. The wilderness can't be conquered all at once. Survival happens incrementally. 1 meal, 1 shelter, 1 day stacked upon the next. After a breakfast of jerky and the last of the parched corn, Cooper and Fitzgerald gather their few possessions. They travel light, as all mountain men must. Rifle, possible bag, knife, axe, blanket. The tools of survival, nothing more. "Where's your cabin?" you ask, realizing you never thought to inquire before. "Down by the fork," Fitzgerald replies, gesturing vaguely southward. "About half a day's walk when there's no snow. Probably take us till nightfall in this. The snow remains deep, nearly 3 feet in places. Travel will be exhausting, especially breaking trail through untouched drifts." "You should take snowshoes," you say, pointing to a pair hanging on the wall. Crude things you'd fashioned earlier in the fall from bent wood and rawhide strips. Cooper shakes his head. "Keep 'em. We got our own back at camp." "At least take some of the rabbit meat," you insist. There's still a good portion left, smoked over the fire to preserve it. This they accept with nods of thanks. Meat is currency in the mountains, more valuable than gold. I once read a journal entry from a trapper in 1834 who wrote, "Offered Taylor 5 beaver pelts for half his elk haunch. He refused, saying, 'Can't eat pelts.' He was right, of course. Man gets hungry enough, he'd trade a year's worth of furs for a decent meal." At the door, Fitzgerald pauses. "Might check in on you if we're passing through. Make sure you ain't froze solid." It's as close to expressing concern as a mountain man gets. You nod, understanding the sentiment behind the gruff words. "Doors always open," you reply, "except when it's closed against the cold." Cooper actually laughs at that, a short, barking sound. "Reckon we've turned him into a proper mountain man, Fitz, already making terrible jokes." With final nods and brief handshakes, rare physical contact in a world where men typically keep their distance, they depart. You watch from the doorway as they trudge through the deep snow, following the crude path you've all worn between the cabin and the creek. They don't look back. That's not the way out here, and just like that, you're alone again. The cabin feels larger somehow without their presence. and quieter. You close the door against the cold and lean your back against it, surveying your domain. It's still crude by any civilized standard. Rough logs, dirt showing through gaps in the floor planks, smoke stains already darkening the ceiling around the chimney. But it's solid. It will keep you alive through the winter if you're smart and a little lucky. Now comes the next phase, preparing for the long isolation ahead. Here's a sobering fact. I found records from fur company registers showing that approximately 1 in 5 mountain men died during their first winter alone. The most common causes weren't dramatic attacks by bears or hostile tribes. It was starvation, illness, or simple accidents, with no one around to help. With Cooper and Fitzgerald gone, your first priority is food. The remaining rabbit meat will last only a day or two. After that, you'll need to hunt or trap regularly to survive. You spend the morning setting snares along game trails near the creek, small loops of twisted rawhide attached to bent saplings. When triggered, they snap upright, catching rabbits or other small game by the leg or neck. It's a passive way of hunting that works while you attend to other tasks. Next, you need to build up your firewood supply. A cabin this size will consume enormous amounts of wood to stay warm through the winter. Running out of fuel in February would be a death sentence. You drag fallen logs from the nearby forest, cutting them into manageable lengths with your axe. The work is exhausting in the deep snow, but necessary. By midday, you've assembled a substantial woodpile against the south wall of the cabin, protected from the worst of the wind and convenient to the door. Inside, you continue organizing. The shelves need filling, supplies need arranging. Everything must have its place in the confined space of the cabin. From your possible bag, you take inventory of what little you have. Flint and steel for fire starting, a small pouch of precious salt, needle and sinew for repairs, extra lead balls and powder for your rifle, a whetstone for keeping your knife and axe sharp. These items get carefully arranged on the highest shelf, safe from moisture and rodents. You hang your rifle on pegs above the door, easily accessible but out of the way. Your axe leans in the corner near the fireplace, blade protected by a leather sheath you fashioned from scraps. I've always been fascinated by how these men organized their tiny spaces. One archaeological excavation of a trapper's cabin found that he'd created specialized storage areas, one corner for food, another for tools, a third for furs and hides. Everything had its place, maximizing the efficiency of a space barely larger than a modern bathroom. By late afternoon, you've established order within your small domain. The cabin feels not just livable now, but almost comfortable. Still, there's something missing, something you can't quite name until you spot the blank expanse of log wall beside your sleeping platform. Home needs some kind of personal touch, even out here. From your possible bag, you take the stub of a pencil, a luxury item you've held onto through your months in the mountains. With careful strokes, you begin to mark the wall. Not elaborate drawings, just simple hash marks to count the days. Today is October 28th, 1834. Winter stretches ahead, long and uncertain. Below the calendar marks, you sketch a rough map of the surrounding area from memory. The creek, the ridge to the north, the valley opening to the south. Landmarks that might prove useful if you need to navigate in heavy snow. This small act of personalization transforms the space in a subtle but important way. The cabin is no longer just shelter, it's becoming your home. As darkness falls early, as it always does this time of year, you build up the fire and prepare a simple dinner from the remaining rabbit meat. Eating alone again feels strange after the brief companionship of the past few days. I found this heartbreaking passage in a trapper's journal. First night alone in my new cabin. The silence is complete except for the fire's crackle. I caught myself talking to the walls earlier just to hear a human voice. Recited my mother's favourite psalm. Though I ain't been a praying man for years, the sound faded too quickly. You sit on your newly made stool, elbows on the rough table, and consider the months ahead. Winter in these mountains typically lasts until April at least. 5 months of isolation, cold, and constant vigilance. Many men don't make it. Those who do are forever changed by the experience. The prospect should be terrifying, yet you feel a strange calm. The work of building the cabin has given you confidence. If you can transform standing trees into shelter in a matter of days, what else might you accomplish? Sleep comes early, your body still exhausted from days of labor. Sleeping platform, padded now with pine boughs beneath your blanket, is almost comfortable. The fireplace radiates steady heat that reaches even the furthest corners of the small space. You wake once in the night to add more wood to the fire. Standing in the silent darkness, you listen to the cabin settling around you, the soft creaks and pops of new wood adjusting to temperature changes, the occasional sliding thump of snow falling from the roof. These sounds that might have seemed ominous before now feel almost companionable. The cabin is alive in its way, shifting and breathing with the cold. Morning brings new purpose. You check your snares and find 2 rabbits, smaller than you'd like, but food nonetheless. You clean them carefully outside, saving even the entrails to use as bait for other traps. The temperature has dropped further overnight. Your breath freezes instantly in the still air, and the snow squeaks beneath your boots, a sure sign of deep cold. Inside the cabin, frost has formed in the corners furthest from the fireplace, despite your efforts at sealing every crack. This will be the true test of your construction, not just keeping out wind and snow, but fighting against the bone-deep cold that can kill a sleeping man before he ever wakes to add wood to his fire. You spend the day making final improvements to the cabin. Using mud mixed with ashes from the fireplace, you seal the remaining gaps between logs. You add a second layer of bark to portions of the roof that still allow in too much cold air. You fashion a crude door for the window opening that can be closed at night to preserve heat. By midday, you've done all you can reasonably do to winterize the cabin. Now comes another crucial task: creating a cache of emergency supplies outside the cabin. I spoke with a wilderness survival expert who explained the logic behind this practice. Mountain men would build small, concealed caches some distance from their cabins. If disaster struck, fire, roof collapse, marauding hostiles, they'd have emergency supplies to fall back on. It could mean the difference between death and survival. You select a location about 50 yards from the cabin, near a distinctive lightning-struck pine that would be visible even in heavy snow. There, you dig through the snow to the frozen ground beneath, then use your axe to chip out a small hollow. In this cache, you place emergency fire-starting materials wrapped in oiled buckskin, a small knife, a handful of lead balls, and enough powder for a few shots, and some jerky, just enough to keep a man alive for a day or two. You cover the cache with rocks, then snow, marking its location with a subtle arrangement of sticks that would look natural to anyone but you. Insurance against an uncertain future. Returning to the cabin, you're struck by how solid it looks now. Smoke rising steadily from the chimney, walls standing square against the snow. Hard to believe it was just standing timber less than a week ago. Inside, you add wood to the fire and settle in for the evening. The early darkness of winter means long nights ahead, hours to fill before sleep comes. In time, you'll need to develop routines to maintain your sanity through the isolation. Some men whittle or carve, others keep journals, still others simply sit and think, turning memories over like precious stones. For now, though, you're content to simply be, to feel the warmth of the fire, to listen to the soft hiss and pop of burning pine, to know that you've created this sanctuary through your own effort and will. I found a letter from a mountain man to his brother back east that captures this feeling perfectly. Strange to say, Thomas, but I feel a deeper satisfaction in this crude cabin I built with my own hands than in any fine house I ever entered. Every log, every stone in the fireplace, every plank in the floor represents my own labour, my own choices. There is profound peace in that knowledge, even amidst the hardships. Night deepens outside. You check the door latch, add more wood to the fire, and settle onto your sleeping platform. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, more hunting, more preparations for the deepening winter. But tonight, you rest in the knowledge that you've accomplished something significant. You've transformed raw wilderness into shelter. You've created a space that stands between you and death. You've proven, to yourself at least, that you belong in these mountains. The firelight flickers on the log walls, casting warm, dancing shadows. Outside, the temperature continues to drop, stars brittle and bright in the black sky. Inside, you are warm, sheltered, alive. Unlike your comfortable bed in the modern world where survival is taken for granted, here every moment of comfort is earned through effort and knowledge. Every night survived is a victory. Every morning awakened is a gift. As sleep begins to claim you, your thoughts drift to Cooper and Fitzgerald. They should have reached their own cabin by now, perhaps sitting by their own fire, planning their own winter. Come spring, your paths might cross again at rendezvous, or perhaps while working the same stream for beaver. The mountain man's life is often solitary, but never completely alone. Somewhere out there, others like you are fighting the same battle against cold and hunger and isolation. This knowledge provides its own kind of comfort. Your breathing slows, deepens. The cabin holds you in its rough embrace, solid and secure. The fire murmurs in the hearth, a language as old as humanity itself. Your last thought before sleep takes you completely is simple but profound. I built this. With these hands, I built this. And as you drift into dreams, perhaps your thoughts mingle with those of the person listening to this story, warm and comfortable in their own bed, separated from the harsh realities of mountain life by centuries of progress. Perhaps they too feel a whisper of connection to those brave, desperate men who carved shelters from the wilderness with nothing but determination and simple tools. Perhaps they too can appreciate the profound satisfaction of creating something that sustains life, something that stands between fragile humanity and the indifferent forces of nature. And perhaps, as sleep gently overtakes them, they'll carry with them a deeper understanding of what it meant to build a home in the wild, one log at a time. The fire burns low. The cabin stands strong against the night. Winter settles in around it, harsh but beautiful, and inside a mountain man sleeps, ready to face whatever tomorrow brings. Rest well, knowing that the human spirit has always found ways to create warmth and shelter, even in the most challenging circumstances. Let